Look, I look at tariffs, they are an economic tool. That's it. They're an economic weapon, depending how you use it and why you use it and stuff like that. And, people argue, is it inflationary and non-inflationary? I would put in perspective, if it's a little inflationary, but it's good for national security, so be it. I mean, get over it. National security trumps a little bit more inflation, but I think the question is how they get used. Can they be used to bring people to the table? Yes. Is there some unfair trade? Yes. Is there some state-owned subsidies? Yes. Is the president going to use that way in his team? Yeah.
Very good clip there. So I'm new to this tariffs game, I'll admit. I really cut my teeth on Milton Friedman, and he would be very disappointed in me for even entertaining such an idea. But I'm starting to see the light with it. Tiana Lowe Doescher is here, columnist at the Washington Examiner, and Carrie Sheffield here. She's a senior policy analyst at the Independent Women's Voice. Thank you both for being here. Carrie, we'll start with you. Are Trump's tariffs, and I think there's lots of different proposals of tariffs, but he also talked about just like 25% across the board. Is that a good idea?
Well, I agree with you. I'm coming from the school of thought of, yes, I'm all about Milton Friedman, big fan of him, free markets. And what I think Trump has woken myself and a lot of people up to is the fact that we don't have free markets. And when your opponent or your trading partner is not treating you fairly, then unfortunately, you've conditioned them to treat you unfairly until you stand up for yourself. And that's really what Trump is doing by exerting these tariffs to say, for example, Germany, you're not going to accept certain imports. You're not accepting our automobiles or whatever the product. Well, then we're going to put a tariff because you, by not accepting our products, that's essentially a tariff against us. And so it's really a negotiating tactic is what it is. And so I think it's an important reframing at this point to say that these tariffs can be used as tools in order to lower the tariffs for everybody. And I think that is something that I can get behind.
Yeah. Tiana, what do you think? Are these tariffs a good idea?
With all due respect to Jamie Dimon, it's a mistake to think of these tariffs and especially the negotiations as an economic tool when really they're a diplomatic tool, right? Tariffs as an end goal of economic policy are highly inefficient. The risk isn't really inflation, but rather capping economic growth because you reduce that comparative advantage of if it's cheaper for Mexico to produce avocados, let's import the avocados so we can focus on producing computer code and AI. Rather, the tariffs as a means to an end are a highly effective tool, right? We already saw that with the Colombia case. But more importantly, look at Mexico and Canada, right? Exports to the U.S. from both Mexico and Canada comprise about 1/3 of their entire economic output. Now, if let's say these 25% tariffs actually went into effect, it would absolutely harm Americans, not just American consumers, but also, let's say, the 1/5 of all jobs in Texas that are predicated on free trade with Mexico. Mexico is now our number one trading partner. However, if you're taking the gamble that, look, your ability to access our markets are 1/3 of your entire economic output, that means you must crack down on fentanyl crossings through the southern border, illegal immigration, which is becoming a very big problem from Canada because they don't do the requisite visa enforcement. That's a very wise tool. And look, I don't think Milton Friedman would be as opposed to the strategy if my assumption is correct that Trump is using this as a tool, especially if you look at the fact that of the $4 trillion that the U.S. brought in fiscal year 2023, about half came from individual income taxation. It's not a mistake to think that it's better to have a consumption tax because income tax punishes earnings, whereas consumption taxes punish consumption and incentivizes savings. That's not a bad thing. And it also incentivizes work. The idea, though, where it is misguided is when Trump talks about tariffing our allies. Like we do not want to tariff Taiwan and Singapore as we go into this trade war, as we go into not just the trade war, but also the AI Cold War, our modern day space race. We don't want to alienate our allies. But if we use it to say, Germany, get up your defense spending to 3% as part of your requisite dues in NATO's, that's not a bad thing.
Okay. I want to get back to the consumption tax, Tiana. That was really interesting. But I want to get Carrie. Carrie, what do you think about that use of the tool? And one of the lines we use all the time is from Thomas Sowell. He said, there's no such thing as solutions, only trade-offs. So how would Trump and his advisors and you balance the trade-offs of, well, geez, maybe this thing actually might be a little more expensive for Americans if we do this, but it's more important because X, Y, Z. How do we think through that?
Well, yeah, I mean, Sol's obviously right, as he always is, that the trade-off of being able to create and manufacture goods here in the United States, whether it's not having to rely for our medical supply chain on China, for example, that's important. That's a national security issue as well, as we saw during COVID. I don't want to be reliant for my medical supplies on China. Especially during an emergency. And so there are all different things and trade-offs that we are considering. And certainly when it comes to the idea that, Trump was elected in part to bring or revive a manufacturing base, I think that that's an important goal. I do think that, I agree with what Tiana said as far as like, we have a global economy, and if you can focus on what you're best at the lowest price. This is, if for some manufacturing things, we don't have the competitive advantage, but partially why at this point is because we don't have the proper tariffs or sort of the trade levels that would make it economically efficient. And so if through the tariffs, if the tariffs are a means to an end, the tariffs for their own sake, that is something that, again, the sort of like never Trump world doesn't understand. Trump doesn't like tariffs for their own sake. He likes it because there's a purpose, and that purpose is to revive making things in the United States, but doing it in a way that is cost effective and using the tariffs as a tool so that we are competitive and that we're being able to, have the leverage that we used to have. And that's what I love about Trump is that when you're talking about America first, it doesn't mean that he wants to invade or it's not about being aggressive to other people, but it's about saying you can't take advantage of me anymore. And part of that is tariffs.
Yeah, that's right. Tiana, you mentioned this consumption tax. So Trump has this line where he says, there's the days of taxing Americans to enrich other nations is over. It's time we tax other nations to enrich Americans. Something like that. And I'm for to go back to Milton Friedman again, he's like, I'm for getting rid of any tax for any reason in any way. And I want to get rid of the income tax so badly. I'm so sick of these Republicans thinking that they're tough because they're extending the current tax cuts. Like, that is so not good enough. We need to lower taxes way more. And Trump has thrown out this idea of getting rid of the income tax even and replacing it with tariffs. I've heard other analyses say that that's not nearly enough money would be brought in to continue to fund the government in any way whatsoever. I've heard the number that's would cover 5% of our spending or something if we taxed, if we got our money through tariffs. But Trump does have this external revenue service. Anyway, what do you think about a consumption tax and a tariff tax to decrease the income tax?
I mean, as a paradigm, consumption taxes are always a vastly smarter idea than income taxation, period. Whatever that consumption tax looks like, it varies, right? You could have a pot tax, you could have a VAT tax. VAT taxes are popular because you can make them very progressive. Don't tax essential foods, maybe tax, clothing at 5% and tariff yachts at 100%. Sure, there's a smart way of doing it. The issue is just that Donald Trump really likes to style himself, especially in the second term, after William McKinley, because William McKinley also presided over a defense of that strong U.S. dollar against William Jennings Bryan, the Cross of Gold. Go back, it's wonderful history, and Trump knows it well. And also tariffs. The difference is that at the time, the U.S. had close to no mandatory spending. We spent $6.7 trillion last year. The majority of that went to mandatory spending, and it's something like 4/5 of that spending went to mandatory entitlements plus pre-existing interest payments on our $36 trillion national debt. So the amount that you would have to just tariff, it wouldn't even be able to compensate for that loss in income tax, because at a certain point, people respond to incentives. And as those tariffs get more expensive, more people just bite the bullet and purchase from home or purchase from non-tariff nations. But again, as a paradigm shift, not a bad thing. The issue is that Donald Trump doesn't want to go after entitlements. And without going after the entitlements, without so much as even, let's just say increasing the retirement age to 70, you're looking at a 23% benefit cut to Social Security in the next 8 to 9 years. So that's not even going into the issue of, do we transition to a consumption tax? But look, I think more progress has been made in educating the public in understanding the difference between these things. Because look, most people don't study so well, they don't study economics, and it's our job as economic commentators to educate people in understanding that a system that punishes you for earning more is less efficient than a system that incentivizes saving, investment, and that's what a consumption tax-based system is.
Yeah, very good. All right, Tiana, Lowe, Doescher, a columnist at the Washington Examiner, and Carrie, Sheffield, senior policy analyst, Independent Women's Voice. Ladies, thank you very much for your insight today. Grateful.
Thank you.
Thank you.